Eli Turner had spent most of his 34 years under the same Arizona sun. He was a man who spoke little, worked hard, and tried not to think too much about the past. His ranch sat near a dry creek bed that once ran strong before the droughts came. Now the land was quiet, too quiet sometimes. The only sounds were the wind brushing over the cactus and the faint creak of the windmill as it turned. He had a few ranch hands, but most days he preferred to work alone. It kept his mind steady. That morning started like any other. The air was warm, the sky clear and wide. Eli saddled his old horse Copper and set out to check a broken section of the fence along the eastern ridge. A herd had wandered close to the border again, and he didn't want to lose another calf to the wilderness. He rode slow, letting the horse take its time through the rocky path. Dust rose with each step, glowing like smoke in the morning sun. When he reached the ridge, he saw something unusual. A rider stood on the opposite slope, still as stone. For a moment, Eli thought it was just a trick of the light. Then the wind shifted and he saw her clearly. A woman, sitting tall on a chestnut horse, her black hair braided with feathers that glinted like small bits of silver. She wore leather and beads, her clothes marked with colors of the local Apache tribe. Eli stopped his horse halfway up the slope. He had seen warriors before, but never like her. Never one riding alone. Her gaze was steady, not afraid, not challenging. Just watching him. For a long minute, neither moved. The land between them was silent, heavy with old mistrust. Finally, Eli raised one hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon. The woman nodded slightly and began to ride down toward him. Her movements were careful, measured. When she came close enough, he saw her eyes, dark and calm like still water before a storm. "I am Taya," she said, her voice low and clear. "My people sent me to speak." Eli removed his hat and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "You're a long way from camp," he said. "What's this about?" She looked past him toward the dry riverbed in the distance. "The land you fence," she said softly, "was once where our horses drank. The stream is weak now and we need water. My elders wish to make peace and talk about sharing it." Eli blinked. He hadn't expected that. Most of the tribes had stopped sending messengers years ago. Too many promises broken, too many graves on both sides. He studied her face, trying to see if this was a trick. But her eyes told another story, one of weariness, not deceit. "I don't make big decisions," he said slowly. "But I can listen. Maybe there's a way." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Then meet me tomorrow. Sunrise at the old riverbed." She turned her horse as if to leave, then paused. "Come alone," she added. Eli hesitated. "Is it safe?" A faint smile touched her lips. "That depends on you." Before he could answer, she rode off, the wind catching her hair and feathers. Within moments, she was gone, swallowed by the shimmering heat of the desert. Eli sat there for a long time, hat resting on his knee. Something about her words stayed with him. He had seen men who wanted war, but not one like her, someone who spoke of peace like it was still possible. When he finally rode back home, the sun was already low. He unsaddled Copper, poured himself a tin cup of coffee, and sat on the porch. The horizon glowed red and gold, and in that light he could almost see her silhouette again on the ridge. He thought about what to do. His neighbors wouldn't like the idea of him meeting with the tribe. The last time someone tried, it ended in blood. But there was something in Taya's voice that made him believe her. Something honest. Something tired of the endless fight. That night, Eli barely slept. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the coyotes call from the hills. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing there, proud and calm, like she carried the weight of her people on her shoulders. He wondered what her life was like beyond those hills. Did she have family? Did she ride alone every time peace needed a face? When dawn finally came, the desert was cool and quiet. Eli dressed in his cleanest shirt, not because he wanted to impress her, but because it felt right to show respect. He left his rifle behind, taking only a small pouch of coffee and water. He told one of his ranch hands he'd be gone till afternoon, then set out toward the riverbed. The ride took an hour. The sun was rising fast, painting the cliffs gold. When he reached the dry river, he saw her already there, waiting beside her horse. She was brushing the mane, her back turned to him. He called out softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and for the first time he saw her smile, not wide, but enough to soften her face. "You came," she said simply. "I said I would," he replied, dismounting. She nodded toward a flat rock under the shade of a mesquite tree. "We can talk here." They sat across from each other, the space between them filled with silence. At first the talk was slow, almost awkward. She spoke of the drought and the tribe's dying horses. Eli explained how the settlers needed water too, and how the government had promised wells that never came. Neither accused the other. They just talked like two tired souls searching for a middle path. After a while, he offered her a cup of coffee from his flask. She accepted it carefully, sniffed it, then took a sip. Her eyes widened slightly. "It's bitter," she said. Eli laughed quietly. "That's how it's meant to be." For a brief moment, the tension eased. The desert wind carried the smell of sage and dust. They talked about small things then. Horses, storms, how both their fathers taught them to ride before they could walk. It felt strange, almost peaceful. But even in that quiet, Eli could sense something behind her calmness, a shadow she didn't speak of. Once, when she looked toward the canyon, her hand brushed the small knife at her side. Not a threat, more like a habit born from years of danger. When the sun climbed high, Taya stood. "I must return," she said. "I will tell my elders you are willing to talk." Eli nodded. "Tell them I'll listen. I don't know if I can promise more than that." She mounted her horse but hesitated. "There are some among us who do not believe in peace," she said softly. "If they act without my word—" "Be careful, Eli Turner," he frowned. "Are you saying this could turn bad?" Her voice grew distant. "I'm saying some wounds run deep." Then she turned and rode off, her figure shrinking against the desert horizon. Eli stood there long after she disappeared, the silence pressing around him like a held breath. He felt uneasy now. He had come for a simple talk, but he could sense it, something larger moving beneath the surface. When he finally rode home, the sun was fierce and the wind harsh. He thought about what she said. He had agreed to talk, but part of him wondered if he had just walked into something he didn't understand. Yet another part of him, quiet and stubborn, refused to back away. That night, as the stars filled the sky, Eli sat on his porch again. The land was peaceful, but his heart was not. He poured himself another cup of bitter coffee and stared toward the dark outline of the distant hills. Somewhere out there, she was preparing for another meeting. Somewhere out there, the line between peace and danger was getting thinner. He didn't know it yet, but his decision to ride out that morning had already changed his fate. What began as a simple talk about water would soon become a story people would whisper for years, about trust, courage, and how a single meeting between a cowboy and a warrior woman nearly rewrote the history of their valley. The next morning came early, painted in soft gold and pale blue. Eli Turner rose before sunrise. The air was cool and sharp, the kind that carried the smell of dust and mesquite. He poured himself a quick cup of coffee, but he couldn't drink much. His stomach was tight with something he couldn't name, part worry, part curiosity. He checked the sky, checked his horse's saddle, and checked the small pouch of coffee beans he planned to share again. Then, with a deep breath, he rode out toward the riverbed. The desert was quiet except for the crunch of his horse's hooves and the distant cry of a hawk. Every sound seemed louder that morning. His thoughts moved slow, heavy like stones. He wondered what he was walking into. He had never been afraid of men or beasts, but what he feared now was misunderstanding. One wrong word, one wrong move, and it could all end badly. When he reached the riverbed, he saw Taya standing beside her horse again. She was early, as if she had been waiting for hours. Her long hair was tied back tighter this time, and the calmness he saw in her before seemed strained. Yet she greeted him with the same steady tone. "You came again," she said. "I said I would," Eli answered. "Did you speak with your elders?" "Yes," she said softly. "They agreed to listen, but not all of them." Eli dismounted and tied his horse to a dry branch. "I figured as much," he said. "Not everyone on my side's happy either." A faint smile crossed her lips. So we both walked between fires. They sat again in the shade of the same mesquite tree. Eli poured water into 2 tin cups and handed one to her. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable this time. It felt almost natural, like two travelers sharing a resting place on a long road. After a while, Taya began to speak about her people, the hardships of the drought, the sickness among their horses, the children who went hungry. Eli listened carefully, not interrupting. Her voice carried the weight of years, of stories that stretched far beyond what any map could show. "My father was chief once," she said quietly. He believed peace was the only way to survive. But when he died, others began to doubt it. They see fences and think of cages. They see men with rifles and think of betrayal. I am here because I still believe he was right. Eli nodded slowly. My pa used to say peace only works if both sides want it. The problem is most folks just want to win. Taya looked at him for a long moment as if trying to decide whether to trust him fully.
Do you want to win, Eli Turner?
He looked at the dry sand between his boots. I just want the land to stay alive, he said finally. If that means sharing water, then maybe that's worth it. Her expression softened and she seemed to relax. They spent the next hour marking the riverbed with sticks and stones, drawing lines in the sand to show where the water could be divided fairly. Eli showed her how the settlers dug shallow wells near the north side. Taya told him where the ground still held hidden springs. For a moment, they were not enemies or strangers. They were problem solvers, two people trying to make something work that the world said couldn't. The sun rose higher. Sweat ran down Eli's neck and Taya's braid stuck to her back, but neither seemed to notice. They were too deep in their work. It was strange, Eli thought, how easily trust could begin with just small acts. Listening, sharing, helping. But somewhere in the rocks above them, unseen eyes were watching. 3 young Apache warriors had followed Taya that morning. They didn't believe in her mission. They thought she had gone soft, letting a white man speak as if he were her equal. They hid behind the stones, whispering to each other, waiting for a reason to act. Taya didn't know they were there, but she felt uneasy. She paused several times, looking toward the cliffs, her hand brushing her knife's handle without thinking. Eli noticed and frowned. Something wrong? He asked. She hesitated. No, she said softly. The desert just feels different today. He looked around too, scanning the ridge. Everything looked still. The same wind, the same silence, but he trusted her instincts more than his own. Maybe we should wrap up early, he said quietly. She shook her head. No, if we stop now, it will look like fear. They'll say I failed. Eli didn't argue, though something in his gut twisted. He had seen enough bad moments to know when trouble was close. Still he stayed because leaving her alone felt wrong. They continued their talk. The sun was now high enough to make the sand shimmer like gold. The air smelled of heat and sagebrush. Eli leaned over to sketch another line when he caught a flicker of movement on the cliff. Just a flash like sunlight on metal. He froze. Taya, he said softly. Don't move. She glanced up at him, confused. What is it? Before he could answer, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Then came the sound of something slicing fast, an arrow screaming past his shoulder and striking the sand beside him. Instinct took over. Eli grabbed Taya's arm and pulled her down behind the log they had sat on earlier. Another arrow followed, then another, thudding into the wood. Dust filled the air. The horses neighed wildly and tried to pull free. Taya's heart pounded as she turned toward the cliffs. No, she shouted in her own tongue. Stop, this is not the way. But the figures above didn't listen. 3 warriors stepped out from behind the rocks, their bows drawn tight, faces full of anger and confusion. They shouted back at her in sharp words Eli couldn't understand. He looked at her. Are they yours? Her face was pale with shock. Yes, she whispered. But they act without my word. Another arrow flew, this one grazing Eli's sleeve. He didn't draw his gun, he couldn't bring himself to. The last thing he wanted was to start a blood feud. He just grabbed a stick and waved it in the air to draw their attention away from her. We don't have to do this, he shouted. The warriors hesitated, unsure. Taya stood up suddenly, right in the open. Stop, she cried again, her voice echoing across the canyon. He came to talk, not to fight. The wind carried her voice far. One of the warriors lowered his bow slightly, uncertain. The others looked at each other. Then from behind them a deep voice called out, Older, stronger, enough. All eyes turned to the ridge where an elder rider appeared on a gray horse. He looked down at the scene with a face carved by age and weather. His long white hair moved in the wind like a banner. Taya bowed her head instantly. Grandfather, she said softly. The elder rode down the rocky path slowly, his eyes never leaving Eli. When he reached the bottom, he stopped and looked between them. The air was heavy with tension. Finally he spoke. This man, the elder said in broken English, he come with no weapon? Eli nodded. I came to talk. Nothing else. The elder studied him for a long time, then turned to the young warriors. You shame us, he said sharply in his native tongue. You strike before listening. Go. They lowered their heads, ashamed, and disappeared up the ridge. Taya exhaled deeply, relief washing over her face. The elder dismounted slowly and walked to Eli. "You could have shot," he said. "But you did not." Eli shook his head. "Didn't seem like the right kind of victory." The old man looked at him and nodded once. Then he turned to Taya. "You chose well, granddaughter. This one speaks true." It was the first time Eli realized she was kin to the elder, the very heart of her tribe. He felt both humbled and uneasy. The elder looked back at him. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will come to our camp. We will speak again. No more ambushes." Eli nodded. "I'll be there." As the old man rode away, Taya turned to Eli. Her eyes were bright with gratitude and shame. "I am sorry," she said. "They did not trust me." Eli brushed the dust off his coat. "Maybe they will after today." She looked toward the ridge where her people vanished and then back at him. "You could have died." "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I think some things are worth the risk." They stood there for a long time, neither moving, until the wind shifted again. The heat softened and the desert seemed to breathe once more. When Eli finally rode home that afternoon, the memory of the arrows stayed with him. Their sound, their nearness, the fear in her eyes. But stronger than that was something else, respect. He realized that real peace didn't come from words or papers, it came from courage, and today he had seen plenty of that in her. That night, as stars filled the wide desert sky, Eli looked out from his porch again. He knew tomorrow's meeting would not be easy, but something inside him had changed. The fight was no longer about land or water. It was about trust, and whether two worlds could find a way to meet halfway without destroying each other first. The sun rose red the next morning, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Eli Turner saddled his horse in silence. The events of yesterday played again in his mind. The arrows, the shouts, the way Taya had stood between him and danger. He still felt the echo of that moment. She had risked her life to protect him, and he didn't even know why. Maybe she believed peace was worth more than pride. Maybe she just didn't want more death. Whatever the reason, he knew he couldn't let her face the consequences alone. He packed a small satchel of dried bread, coffee beans, and a white handkerchief as a sign of peace. Then he set off toward the Apache camp, keeping his pace steady. The desert was quiet except for the whisper of the wind. The land seemed to hold its breath as if it knew something important was about to happen. When he reached the ridge overlooking the camp, he saw smoke curling up from several small fires. Children ran between the tents. Dogs barked and horses grazed nearby. The smell of cooked maize drifted in the air. Eli paused for a moment, his chest tight. He had never been inside a native camp before. He knew one wrong move could turn the day bad, but he also knew turning back would be worse. He took a deep breath, dismounted, and walked his horse down the slope. Every eye in the camp turned toward him. Some faces showed curiosity, others anger. A few of the young warriors from the ambush stood near the fires, their expressions hard. But no one moved against him. Not yet. Taya appeared from one of the larger tents. Her hair was tied back, her face calm but serious. She walked toward him, her steps light and confident. When she reached him, she nodded. "You came," she said. "I gave my word," Eli replied. "And I figured I owed it after yesterday." She glanced at the men nearby, then lowered her voice. "There are still some who think this is foolish. You must speak carefully," he nodded. "I'll do my best." Taya led him toward the center of the camp where the elder sat by the largest fire. The old man looked up slowly as Eli approached. His face was stern but not hostile. The lines around his eyes spoke of long years and many battles. "You kept your promise," the elder said in slow English. "Sit." Eli removed his hat and sat cross-legged on the ground. The fire crackled between them. Around them, a small crowd gathered, whispering among themselves. Taya translated the elder's words for the others. He began by speaking of the old ways, how the land once belonged to everyone, how the river had been a gift from the spirits, not something to be claimed or fenced. Then he spoke of the suffering his people had endured since the settlers came: disease, hunger, and loss. Eli listened without interrupting. He didn't defend his people or argue. He just listened because that was what he had come to do. When the elder finished, Eli spoke slowly. "I can't change what's been done," he said. "But I don't want any more fighting. I only came here to live and raise cattle, same as any man. The water's enough for both sides if we take turns using it. I'll help dig new wells if you'll show me where the springs are. No one needs to die for dirt and dust. Taya translated his words, her voice calm and steady. The elder watched Eli's face carefully. The silence that followed felt endless. Then the old man nodded once. You speak plain, he said, like a man who has seen too much war. I have, Eli answered. And I'd rather see peace for a change. The elder looked at Taya. What do you say, granddaughter? Taya's eyes shone softly in the firelight. I say he tells the truth, she said. If there is to be peace, it must start with trust. The elder rose slowly, his joints stiff. He held out his hand toward Eli. Then today peace begins. Eli stood and shook his hand firmly. A murmur went through the camp. Some nodded, others turned away, but no one shouted. The old man smiled faintly. You will eat with us tonight, he said. It was the first time Eli felt his chest loosen since he'd arrived. He sat again by the fire while food was shared. Taya brought him a bowl of corn stew and bread made from ground seeds. It tasted simple but honest. He thanked her quietly. As the night deepened, the atmosphere in the camp softened. The children approached Eli out of curiosity, asking to touch his hat, his boots, even his horse. He laughed and let them. Some of the warriors who had attacked him earlier stood watching, still uncertain but less hostile. Taya sat near him, her face lit by the glow of the fire. They see you now, she said softly. Not just the color of your skin. He smiled. And I see you, all of you, not as enemies but as neighbors. She looked at him then, a long quiet look that said more than words. There was understanding there and maybe something deeper, respect, perhaps even friendship, but peace was never simple. As the night went on, one of the young warriors, Tall Hawk, the same who had led the ambush, rose and spoke harshly. He pointed at Eli, his voice sharp with anger. Taya translated quickly. He says you can't be trusted, that you will break your promise like the others. Eli didn't get up. He just looked at Tall Hawk calmly. You're right to be careful, he said. But you saw me yesterday. If I meant harm, I'd have fought back. I didn't come here for blood. I came here to stop it. The warrior glared but said nothing more. The elder silenced him with a raised hand. The fire popped loudly, breaking the tension. Later, when most of the camp had gone to rest, Eli walked a short distance from the fire to breathe in the cool desert air. The stars above were bright and endless. Taya followed him quietly. You spoke well, she said softly. Even those who doubted you will think about your words. He looked at her, his expression tired but peaceful. Your grandfather's a wise man, but I think it's you they really listen to. She shook her head. They listen because you didn't lie. That is rare. They stood there for a moment, the night wind gently moving her braid. In the distance, a coyote howled. The firelight flickered behind them, painting their shadows across the sand. Do you think this will last? He asked. She was quiet for a long time before answering. If both sides remember today, maybe. But if even one forgets, it will start again. He nodded. Then let's make sure they don't forget. She looked at him and smiled faintly. For that, we will both have to be very stubborn. He chuckled. That part I'm good at. As they spoke, a sudden gust of wind swept through the camp, carrying sparks from the fire up into the dark sky like tiny stars. Taya looked up at them and whispered something in her own tongue. A prayer, Eli guessed. The next morning, when Eli left the camp, many came to see him off. The elder gave him a small carved stone as a token of peace. Taya rode with him as far as the ridge. They stopped there, looking down at the valley below. The dry river, the scattered fences, the wide, empty land between them. Someday, Taya said quietly, this land will remember us, not for fighting, but for what we tried to do. Eli looked at her and nodded. I think it already does. She smiled, though her eyes were heavy. Go now. They will watch to make sure you reach home safe. He tipped his hat. And you take care of your people, Taya. You're stronger than you know. She didn't answer, just gave a small nod. He turned his horse and started down the trail, the morning sun bright on his back. When he looked over his shoulder one last time, she was still there on the ridge, her figure outlined against the light. Eli rode home in silence, the desert stretching endlessly around him. But this time it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, with hope, with memory, with something new beginning. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years he believed peace was possible. And it all started because one brave woman had chosen to stand between war and reason, between fear and hope, and had refused to let the desert swallow them both. Days turned into weeks after that morning, when Eli Turner rode away from the Apache camp. The wind had shifted across the valley, and somehow the land felt quieter. The fences that once marked anger now seemed less sharp. The cattle grazed near the river without fear. And sometimes when Eli rode along the ridge, he saw riders from Taya's tribe watering their horses there. No one raised weapons. They nodded, watched, and went their way. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was peace, the kind that grows slowly like green grass after rain. Eli worked long days on his ranch, fixing broken gates and checking on his herd. He often found himself thinking of the camp, the firelight, the elders' calm eyes, the way the children laughed when they touched his hat. But mostly he thought of Taya. He thought of how she had stood between him and danger, and how her words carried both strength and sadness. He didn't see her again for a while, but the image of her stayed in his mind like a song he couldn't forget. One afternoon, as the sun began to set behind the red cliffs, he saw a lone rider approaching. His heart beat a little faster when he realized who it was. Taya rode with her usual calm grace, the feathers in her braid catching the golden light. She stopped at the fence line, and Eli walked over from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You came far," he said, smiling a little. "I said I would," she replied softly. "The elder sent me to bring you news. The wells we dug near the North Ridge are full again. Your men's tools helped." "That's good to hear," Eli said. "Guess we did something right then." She nodded, but her face held something deeper, something that worried him. "There is still trouble," she said after a pause. "Some of the young warriors think peace makes us weak. They say we are giving up what is ours." Eli sighed. "Sounds like the same kind of talk we get on my side. Some folks don't like sharing either." "They don't understand," she said. "They see fences and think they mean chains. They don't see the choice behind them." Eli leaned on the fence, looking out toward the horizon. "Change always scares people," he said. "But if we keep working together, maybe they'll see the good in it one day." Taya's gaze softened. "You speak as if you belong to both sides." "Maybe I do," Eli said with a faint smile. "Maybe that's the only way peace works." For a long moment they stood there in silence, the wind tugging gently at their clothes. Then she reached into a small leather pouch and took out something wrapped in cloth. "The elder asked me to give you this," she said, handing it to him. Eli unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small wooden carving, a horse and a bird standing side by side, their heads lowered as if in respect. He turned it over in his hands, speechless. "It means strength and freedom," she explained. "The horse is you. The bird is our people. Different but bound by the same sky." Eli's throat tightened a little. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "Tell him I'll keep it close," she nodded. "He said you already have his trust. That's not something he gives easily." The conversation drifted to lighter things after that. Talk of the land, the coming rains, and the strange peace that still felt fragile but real. When Taya finally mounted her horse to leave, Eli called after her. "You ever need help with your wells again, you know where to find me." She looked back over her shoulder. "And if you ever lose your way in the desert, follow the hawk's cry. It always leads home." He smiled as she rode away, her figure shrinking against the sunset until she disappeared into the horizon. The next few weeks brought a steady rhythm. The settlers began to trade quietly with the tribe. Salt, grain, and tools exchanged for woven goods and hides. The two sides still kept their distance, but they no longer saw each other as ghosts or threats. Even the sheriff from town, who once warned Eli to stay out of Indian business, stopped asking questions when he saw the peace holding. One morning, heavy clouds rolled over the mountains. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and a hard rain began to fall. The dry riverbeds turned to streams again. Eli worked through the storm, making sure his herd stayed safe. Just as he was finishing, he saw someone riding fast through the downpour. His heart sank. He knew that posture. It was Taya, her horse drenched and wild-eyed. Eli ran to meet her as she dismounted. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice tense. Her clothes were soaked, her braid undone, her eyes full of worry. "There was a fight," she said breathlessly. "Some men from town, hunters, crossed the border last night. They shot a deer inside our land. One of our boys tried to stop them, and they struck him. Now the young warriors are ready for revenge." Eli swore under his breath and grabbed his coat. "Where are they now?" "They're gathering near the ridge," she said. "They plan to ride by dawn." He didn't hesitate. Then we'll get there before they do. They rode through the storm together, the rain beating hard against their faces. The trail was slippery, the sky dark, but neither slowed down. Eli's heart pounded with urgency. He had worked too hard to see peace fall apart now. When they reached the ridge, they found a dozen young warriors already waiting, their horses restless, their faces hard with anger. Tall Hawk was among them, his hand on his bow. He glared at Eli the moment he saw him. "You shouldn't be here," he said sharply. "This is not your fight." Eli dismounted slowly. "It is my fight," he said, "because I don't want to see anyone die for a mistake. The white men came to our land," Tall Hawk said. "They killed our food and laughed. Do you think words can fix that?" Taya stepped forward, her voice strong and clear.
Tall Hawk, enough.
"You would undo everything we built. One wrong choice and blood will fall on both sides again." The young man's jaw tightened. "You speak like him now," he said bitterly. "Maybe you've forgotten who you are." Eli took a slow step closer. "She remembers. Maybe better than you do. She's trying to save all of you." The tension thickened. For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the only sound was the wind. Then from the distance, another rider appeared, an older man from town holding a hat in his hands. He rode carefully toward them, stopped, and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said. "We didn't mean to trespass. My brother's boys shot the deer. They were fools. They'll pay for it." Tall Hawk stared at him, disbelief written across his face. "Why should we believe you?" The man pointed toward Eli. "Because he asked me to come. Said I owed it to the peace you both made." Eli met Taya's eyes, and she gave a small, grateful nod. The moment hung there, fragile but real. The young warriors looked uncertain now, their anger cooling under the weight of reason. Finally, Tall Hawk lowered his bow. "This time," he said quietly, "but next time, no words." "That's fair," Eli said softly, "but there won't be a next time." The group slowly dispersed, the tension dissolving like fog after rain. Taya turned to Eli, relief clear in her face. "You came just in time," she said. "Guess I'm getting good at that," he said with a faint grin. When the storm finally cleared, they rode back together under a sky washed clean by rain. The land smelled fresh again, alive. The dry river had become a shallow stream, flowing between their worlds. By the time they reached the edge of Eli's ranch, the sun was setting. The light spread across the wet earth like gold. Taya stopped her horse and looked at him. "Today could have ended in blood," she said. "But it didn't. You have a good heart, Eli Turner." He looked down, embarrassed. "Just trying to keep promises." She smiled softly. "That's what makes you different." He didn't know what to say after that. She turned her horse toward the hills and began to ride away. He watched her go, his heart heavy but full. The peace they had saved that day was fragile, but real, and he knew it was worth every mile, every risk. Every sleepless night when he returned home, the carved horse and bird still sat on his table, untouched by the storm. He placed his hat beside it, stared at the small wooden figures, and whispered quietly. We made it another day. Outside, the rain stopped completely, and a soft wind carried the scent of sage through the open window. Somewhere far off, maybe near the hills where she rode, a hawk cried out, a sharp, wild sound that faded into the evening sky, a promise that peace still lived, as long as there were hearts brave enough to protect it. The months that followed were quiet and kind, like the land itself had grown tired of noise and wanted to rest. The river that once ran dry now carried enough water for both the ranchers and the tribe. The air no longer felt heavy with tension. It carried laughter sometimes, the sound of children playing near the shallows, both settler and Apache together, curious about one another but without hate in their hearts. Eli Turner rode the borders of his ranch often, not out of fear anymore, but out of habit. He liked seeing the world calm again. Sometimes he would find small signs that the tribe had passed through, a fresh track, a feather caught on a branch, a mark carved into the bark of a tree. And sometimes when the wind blew from the east, he could smell their campfires. He would stop, smile faintly, and whisper to himself, "They're out there, still keeping the peace." Word spread across the nearby towns about what had happened. Folks in the saloon spoke of the cowboy who rode into an Apache camp alone and came back alive. Some said he was lucky, others called it foolishness, but none could deny that things had changed. There hadn't been a single raid or skirmish since that day. Even the sheriff, who once warned Eli to keep his distance, tipped his hat when he passed. "You done something rare, Turner," he said one afternoon. "You got two sides to stop fighting without spilling a drop of blood. That's worth more than gold out here." Eli didn't think of it that way. He wasn't after praise or history. He just wanted the land to be quiet again, to hear nothing but the wind and the cattle and the soft creak of his saddle. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just the land that had changed. It was him too. He found himself thinking of Taya often. Sometimes he'd catch himself staring at the horizon, waiting for a rider that didn't come. The carving of the horse and bird stayed on his table, dusted every week like something sacred. He had learned to read its meaning in new ways. It wasn't just about peace, it was about balance, about two lives that had crossed for a reason. One spring morning, as the first wildflowers began to bloom, he finally saw her again. She appeared at the ridge above the ranch, just as she had the first time, her silhouette framed against the pale sky. Eli was mending a fence when he noticed her. He smiled to himself and waved. She waved back and rode down the slope with a soft grace that hadn't changed. When she reached him, he noticed faint lines of weariness on her face. Her eyes were the same, though, steady and alive. "You look like someone who's been busy," he said with a grin. "We had a long winter," she replied. "The snow came early, but it passed, it always does." He poured her a cup of coffee from his flask, and they stood by the fence drinking in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need words. After a while, she spoke quietly. "The elder, my grandfather, he is very old now. He says his time is near. He asked me to tell you that peace still holds because of what we built." Eli nodded slowly. "He's a good man. The valley owes him a lot." Taya smiled faintly. "He says the same about you." She looked out across the land, the rolling hills, the faint shimmer of water in the distance. "When I was a child, I used to think this land belonged to us alone. Now I see it belongs to everyone who cares for it." Eli looked at her, his voice soft. "Maybe that's what peace really means, knowing the land owns us, not the other way around." Her eyes met his for a long moment, full of quiet understanding. Before she left that day, she handed him a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. Inside was a piece of blue cloth tied around an arrowhead. "This is from the elder," she said. "He said to keep it close. It means the promise of tomorrow." Eli held it carefully, feeling the smooth edge of the stone. "Tell him I will," he said. She mounted her horse, the wind tugging gently at her braid. "He also said something else," she added. He said, "Tell the cowboy that when I am gone, the valley is his to protect." Eli swallowed hard, his chest heavy. "Then I'll do what I can," he said. "I owe him that." That was the last time he saw her for many seasons. The rains came and went. The crops grew taller. Children who once hid from strangers began to wave at riders from the other side of the valley. The settlers and the tribe began trading openly now, meeting at the riverbank to exchange goods and stories. Time moved on, quiet but steady. Years later, when Eli's hair turned gray and his back began to ache from long days in the saddle, he still rode out to the ridge every morning. From there, he could see the land stretching far and wide, the same hills, the same sky, the same river that had once been a battlefield but was now a lifeline. One autumn afternoon, as the light turned soft and golden, a young boy from the nearby town rode up to his porch. "Mr. Turner," the boy said out of breath, "some travelers from the Apache camp came by. They said to tell you the elder has passed on. They said that people sang his name into the wind." Eli sat still for a long time. The boy shifted awkwardly, unsure what to say next. Finally, Eli nodded. "Thank you, son. That's all I needed to know." That night, Eli lit a small fire outside his cabin. He placed the carved horse and bird beside the flames and the arrowhead on top of his hat. Then he sat quietly, staring at the stars. The fire cracked softly and the night air carried the faint smell of sage. He whispered a few words, not a prayer, but a promise. "You kept your word, old man," he said softly. "I'll keep mine." When dawn came, the valley seemed brighter. The sun rose slow over the hills, and a gentle mist floated over the river. Eli saddled his horse one more time and rode toward the ridge. At the top he stopped and looked out over everything: the ranches, the distant Apache tents, the winding river that glittered like silver. He remembered that first day, the tension, the fear, the arrows flying. And then he remembered her voice, calm and fierce, shouting for peace when everyone else shouted for war. He remembered how she stood between two worlds and refused to let them destroy each other. He smiled faintly. "We did it, Taya," he murmured. "You and me." The wind rose, carrying the smell of dry grass and blooming cactus. Somewhere far off, an eagle cried, circling the sky. It felt like a sign. Years passed and people came and went. Towns grew. Railroads reached farther west, and the world changed faster than anyone could imagine. But long after Eli Turner was gone, the stories remained. Old men at the saloon still told the tale of the cowboy who faced an ambush and lived because an Apache warrior chose honor over revenge. The children near the valley grew up hearing of the day when peace began, not in a treaty signed by governments, but in a riverbed where two strangers spoke and listened to each other for the first time. And if you ever travel through that land, now they say you can still find the small carving of a horse and bird buried near the old cabin site, worn smooth by time. They say that when the wind blows right, you can hear faint whispers, two voices carried on the air, talking like they once did beside the fire. The land remembers them. The hills, the river, even the stones keep their story. It's said the valley still blooms early after rain, as if the earth itself honors their promise. And when the hawk cries from the cliffs, the sound echoes across the canyon, rising into the endless sky, a reminder that peace is never born from power, but from courage, patience, and hearts brave enough to listen. That's how the story of Eli Turner and Taya, the tribe's warrior and the cowboy who never saw the ambush coming, lives on. Not as legend, but as truth carried through generations. A truth that even in the harshest deserts, peace can take root. And once it does, it can outlive the men and women who made it, shining quietly across the land long after their names fade into the wind.